Are you going to be able to see how many people are watching?
I think so. I think last time it was just a couple, but I think we've done a better job of advertising this one.
Okay. Are you going to be able to see how many people are watching?
This is not. There we are. YouTube is doing more advertisements now.
Probably a good time for them. Lucrative market.
YouTube is doing more advertisements now. Okay. All right. I think we are live. I have watching the video and watching the Zoom. I'm going to wait just a minute or so to get started.
Okay. Like trying to see all the. It makes me so proud to see all the book covers all lined up. They look so good.
Yeah, there were some really pretty ones.
I think so.
All right, we are also recording now, so we can use this later. I'm going to give it maybe just one more minute before we really get started.
It's kind of the worst combination, both live and recorded. You know, if it was one, it would be maybe less intimidating, but it's both.
So you're both live, so you can't make mistakes, and then it's also
Right.
recorded for posterity.
Exactly. Yes. So everyone will be able to watch all the mistakes I made live forever. Yeah.
That's fine. You'll be great.
It's
I'm sure you know more
fun.
about these books than anyone else.
Probably not than the authors. Maybe I'll get some authors who are upset that I've mischaracterized their books. Hopefully not.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to pin my video. Welcome, everyone, anyone who's watching. I see we have a few people watching. I'm going to go ahead and share some information about our exhibit and our virtual booth before the office hour really gets started. So just a brief intro. My name is Jenna, and I manage our exhibits at the University Press of Florida. This is our second acquisitions editor office hour of the fall 2020 conference season. We did one in September with Stephanye Hunter in connection with the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. So because almost all of the conferences that we usually attend as exhibitors have been held virtually, we're doing these office hours to kind of be able to connect with people be able to connect our editors with people who may be interested in hearing them talk, hearing about our new books, and maybe even asking questions. So this is in conjunction with the Modernist Studies Association. So they normally have their conference around this time, and we normally attend. They're having some digital events that are happening this October, I believe, later this week. So we are gonna just have a brief session here where you can hear about our Modernist Studies books and you can ask questions if you have them. We have set up a virtual booth that attendees or anyone can browse. The URL is above me. It's upress.ufl.edu/MSA20. And we have all the new books that we're going to talk about today and a lot more books. There are many, many books in the virtual booth if you want to browse. And if you use the discount code MSA20, you'll get very large discounts on all of their books. It's around 50 to 60% for most of them. We're doing free shipping on all of our orders. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for those of you who would normally be attending our booth in person and buying our books there. We also have, this is our 75th anniversary year, so we are giving free UPF 75 tote bags with every purchase of $50. So you can get some good books, you can get a free tote bag and not have to pay for shipping. We also have some special promotions that are going on. So there are 5 books that we've recently brought out in paperback editions in the last year. And so that's great because they're now available at much more affordable prices if people are interested in course adoption or things like that. And we're also offering 50% off the ebook editions of these books through November 30th. And if you want more info, if you want to look into these, you can visit our blog, which is floridapress.blog. And one of our recent blog posts is welcome to our 2020 MSA virtual booth. And that will give you all the information about both our virtual booth and the special discounts. And the ebook discounts, just to be clear, you should be able to get them virtually anywhere. So whatever your preferred ebook reader is, ebook vendor, if you just find that book, it'll be 50% off what the standard price is. And I think that's about all I wanted to mention as far as our virtual booth goes. I'll be monitoring the chat on YouTube. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in here and we'll do our best to answer them. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Stephanye Hunter, who's our editor for Modernist Studies. And I think she's going to get us started by talking about some of our new books in Modernist Studies.
Yeah, thank you, Jenna. And so I'm really excited about the books that we've published in the past year, and I'm really disappointed that we weren't able to see them in person. I mean, obviously I can see them, but please check out the booth and look at them and order copies if you're interested. I'm really proud of them. And I just kind of wanted to walk through, there's 7, I think, new books that have published since the last MSA. Just kind of briefly go through them, let you take a look, tell you a little bit about them. The first one is Women Making Modernism. Well, this is gonna, okay, there we go. This is by edited collection by Erica Del Sandro. And this book is looking at the way that women were contributing to modernism, which has been a kind of growing emphasis within modernist studies with the new journal. And Erica and the contributors are proposing to think of these women modernists in arrangements rather than hierarchies, and to look at the networks and the connections between them. And I think that's really very interesting because it allows us to look at the modernist figures who maybe weren't the writers or the people creating the books that we're reading, but also the people who were making the connections, the women who were fostering relationships, introducing people, providing funding. And so by putting these pieces together, the volume is proposing to reposition women writers as more than just contributors, but as actually makers of modernism. It's an excellent, excellent book. Highly recommend it. I'm going to say that after every book that I think. Next up is Amy Feinstein's Gertrude Stein and the Making of Jewish Modernism. And Amy has worked so hard on this book. years and years of effort, research, incredible work. It bridges modernist studies and Jewish studies, and Amy is arguing for both the importance of avant-garde modernist texts in Jewish literary studies, and also the importance of Stein's Jewish identity to her own writing, which is something that hasn't really been highlighted as much. And Feinstein is arguing that Stein was influenced by the 19th century poet Matthew Arnold, who wrote about Hebraism and Hellenism. And Gertrude Stein was writing during the Third Reich in Europe. So she was giving a lot of thought to what Judaism, her Jewish identity meant, and what Judaism meant in the culture around her. And Amy Feinstein is arguing that in her writing, she's interrogating these questions and these kind of demonstrating her Judaism through the way that she's writing, less overtly, but she's kind of creating a Jewish grammar of modernism, is how Feinstein states it. And Jenna said the covers are all beautiful. I love all these covers, which are also behind me. So, the next one is by Melanie Dawson. It's on Edith Wharton and the Modern Privileges of Age, also a beautiful cover. This book is about age as a social construct, as either corporeal reality or something that's socially constructed, a perception. And Melanie Dawson is saying that during the modernist period, writers, but especially women writers, were really paying attention to age as a social construct and the effects that was having, especially for them as women, knowing that they were particularly vulnerable to stigmas of aging. So Dawson is looking at centering the work of Edith Wharton, because Wharton's writing is really is a great way to kind of trace this development of aging, but she's engaging with other authors as well, Marjorie Keenan Rawlings, Willa Cather, Zora Neale Hurston, F. Scott Fitzgerald. So it's, Edith Wharton is at the center, Edith Wharton's explorations of aging, but then she's putting her in dialogue with all of these other writers. Next, this one just released. I just picked this up yesterday. This is the first time I've seen it. Ordinary Masochisms by Jennifer Mitchell. Very excited that this book, we were trying to have this book for MSA in Brooklyn, and you'll just have to look at the beautiful cover. So in this book, Jen is looking at 19th century discourses of sexuality, in which sadism and masochism were seen as perversions, and they were gendered. And this is, of course, during the Victorian period, where there's an emphasis on domesticity. And even in scholarship today, masochism is still a very marginalized topic, and very stigmatized. And the thing that Jennifer does in this book is she looks at masochism in ordinary encounters. So she's looking at the female characters in both Victorian and modernist literature. She's kind of going from Charlotte Bronte to D.H. Lawrence, I think. And she's looking at female characters who find masochism in their personal interactions and relationships, and they find it empowering and fulfilling. And then she does something that I think is really great. She pushes the argument, twists it a little bit, and says, but the act of reading itself can be a form of ordinary masochism. For example, if reading difficult text, we read for pleasure, right? And yet we read really difficult texts that are frustrating and challenging. And so if we continue reading them and the goal is to read for pleasure, then there's perhaps something masochistic in that, in reading these challenging texts. And so I really like that she's able to take that step back and look at the experience of reading itself as a form of ordinary masochism. And I thought that would be a nice segue to talking about the James Joyce series, because I think if there were ever a challenging author, it would be James Joyce. And so reading Joyce books are perhaps, Mitchell would say, a form of literary masochism. But we, of course, have this really fantastic James Joyce series. It's edited by Sebastian Knowles. We have 3 new books in the series this year. So proud of all of them. And so I was just going to show those. The first one is Panepiphanal World, James Joyce's Epiphanies. And this is by Sandiam McDuff. And this one is actually available in hardcover paperback and open access, free open access digital versions. We got a grant from the Swiss National Science Foundation or Swiss National Science Fund to bring this book out in open access. So I'm really excited about that. So the Epiphanies are short pieces, prose poems or dramatical pieces that Joyce wrote, mostly when he was a younger man. And they were recorded largely by his brother, Stanislaus Joyce. And usually these are dismissed as juvenile, like writings of a young Joyce who hadn't really reached maturity. But actually Joyce reused these epiphanies, a lot of them, in his later works, in his great novels. And so in this book, Sam is looking at the epiphanies as they were originally recorded, mostly by Stanislaus, and then looks at how Joyce used them in his later works and kind of how they can be, kind of help us see the development and the shaping of Joyce's writing over his career. And it was really cool reading this one. Sam was doing research at Yale and in the archives, and he actually discovered a previously unknown typescript of one of the epiphanies. So it's included in this book, First Discovery. So that was pretty great. Next is Language's Prayer in Finnegan's Wake. This is another Joyce book, and Colleen is looking at how Joyce uses prayer, both prayer and sacred language, the Lord's Prayer, the Book of Kells, as a way for amplifying his emotional and poetic expressiveness. So prayer becomes a form of language for Joyce. And this is interesting because Joyce is not religious, and yet he's incorporating prayer in these really interesting ways in his book. And it's beautifully written. I think Colleen's language is evocative of the subject that she's writing about itself. I'm doing okay on time. I'm not talking forever, that's good. And the last one is Joyce and Geometry. I love this cover. I love all of the covers. By Kieran McMorran. So geometry for 2,000 years has been Euclidean geometry. We've been following the axioms of Euclid from his Elements. Mid-19th century or so, there was this whole paradigm shift in the mathematical world, and suddenly there were non-Euclidean forms of geometry that were being conceptualized. And Kieran found that Joyce was reading these non-Euclidean mathematicians, Giordano Bruno, Henry Poincaré, and he was engaging with their work in Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake mostly, but thinking about how he measured and mapped space throughout his books. Space is very important, place and space is very important in Joyce's books. And the way that he navigated that space is kind of showing Joyce's engagement with these new forms of geometry. And that's the last one that I wanted to talk about. I could talk about any of them for longer if you wanted, but I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Hi. Thank you, Stephanie. That was great. Like I said earlier, all those books that she mentioned, they're in our virtual booth at upress.ufl.edu/MSA20. And they're all available. They're out now. Ordinary Masochisms is the most recent, as Stephanie said, and that just came out. But the next question for Stephanie is if she could maybe give us a sneak peek of some of the books that are coming down the line, some things that are forthcoming that maybe scholars or enthusiasts want to be watching out for. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
So there's one book that's going to be in our spring season that I wanted to talk about. It's in the Joyce series again. It's by Tekla, and I'm going to say her name wrong, Tekla Mexnober. It is Joyce, it's rewriting Joyce's Europe. And so Tekla is looking at how after World War One, the powers in Europe were literally redrawing the continent, redrawing the lines of the country. And Joyce is often seen as a very Irish writer, very, very focused on Ireland, but he was actually quite interested in and engaged with this rewriting process for Europe after World War One. And Tekla kind of outlines how he engaged with these politics of naming countries, of naming cities, choosing languages from the many various local languages that were being used. And then visual aspects of writing. There's some stamps in there. She looks at the typography that's chosen for Joyce's books and kind of makes connections to how Joyce is really thinking about the historical events that are happening around him, both in Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. I think that one's coming out in September. It's going to be announced in the spring, though. And then we'll have more for next fall.
All right, thank you so much, Stephanie. That sounds great. I'm really looking forward to that one. So on behalf of any scholars or writers who might be watching and considering submitting a proposal or an idea, is there anything in particular, any type of work or any, sub-discipline that you're really looking for more books?
So the Joyce series, always. Anything on Joyce, we're always happy to consider. That aside, I think our list is really focused on gender. We have some really fantastic books on gender and gender, sexuality, the body. We had Effective Materialities the previous year, focusing on bodies and the bodily experience. And so those would be things that I'm interested in exploring. I'm also interested in, we're pretty squarely focused in literary studies and not modernist studies, like cultural studies as much. But I'm interested in technology and the ways that literature was engaging with technology. Angela Frattarola's book talking about sound. We have some things in the pipeline looking at different forms of technology that are kind of being implemented during the modernist period and the way that writers were incorporating them and responding to them.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. So I just want to repeat for anyone watching, if you do have any questions, feel free to type them in the YouTube chat. But I have another question for Stephanie. Do you have any advice for scholars who are interested or thinking about submitting a proposal or are about to take that next step? Anything like frequently asked questions that you would normally get at your booth or any kind of information you can share with those interested in submitting something?
Yeah, I would say first look at the presses that are publishing books that you use, and publishing books that you're following or you're excited about. Those might be the presses that you want to approach first, and don't be. I think this is maybe one of the later things we're going to talk about, but one of the disadvantages to not having the in-person conference is that there is less opportunity for conversation. And I know in university press publishing, we're really trying to find ways to overcome that barrier. So I think for me, but also I think for a lot of acquisitions editors, reach out to the editor at the press that you're thinking about publishing with, set up a time to talk. We miss talking to you and we miss hearing book ideas. And I think even if I'm not the right press, if we're not the right press for your book, there's a good chance that I'll know another editor, another press that's really also interested in that topic, and it might be a better fit. And I think editors, we do this because we love the books and we want the books to find the right home. And so use us. We're a resource. Talk to us, tell us your ideas, ask us questions.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. Are Are there any, when you are having these conversations at the exhibits, are there any misconceptions that come up often, or things that people think one thing about academic publishing, but in reality it's something a little different?
The biggest misconception in general is that people think that we publish textbooks. People outside of academia think we publish textbooks, and we don't, which if you're watching this, you probably know. I think among scholars, knowing who your audience is and being honest about who your book is really intended for and who's going to read your book. I know there's a desire to make your work feel very relevant and of interest to the public. And that's a good impulse. You know, you should be writing for your book to be comprehensible. You don't want to be using so much jargon that the 5 people on your dissertation committee are the only ones who can read it. But I think we're a scholarly press. We publish 70% of our books for a scholarly audience. And so pitching a book idea to a scholarly press that is for scholars is okay. And it's actually it's a good thing. And it's good. I like when I find authors who recognize that that is their audience, that this book is probably not going to be on the shelves at Barnes and Noble, that they're writing for their colleagues, for other scholars. And then they can do that effectively. I think those authors are much better equipped to write for their audience because they've correctly identified it.
All right, Stephanie, it looks like we have a question from the audience. So Rachel Lynn wants to know, is there anything in particular that first-time authors should look out for as they navigate the publishing process, or any common pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, first-time authors are usually revising a dissertation to become a book project. There's all sorts of resources on converting a dissertation to a book project. I think I recommend taking some time, taking a step back from the dissertation before reformulating it as a book. I think that can be helpful. The dissertation is meant to get you a PhD, to satisfy your committee. And a book has a very different purpose. And I think a lot of PhD dissertation committees tell their students that that their dissertation is practically a book. And that's a compliment. But I don't know that it's the kind of book that we need it to be yet. There's still several steps that need to happen. So taking some time and kind of reformulating how you want to approach the dissertation to make it a larger book. I also think the review process can be a little bit more, have patience, I guess, with the review process, because as your first book, you're going to get some feedback that maybe you weren't prepared for, you wouldn't expect. And the peer review process is one of my favorite parts of this whole thing, because it's such a collaborative, constructive environment. I mean, these are scholars who were spending hours and hours of their time, mostly uncompensated, to help improve the work of their colleagues, often more junior colleagues, and they give some fantastic advice. And so I think it helps to go into that process being ready to listen and really think carefully about the suggestions that are given, because it does make the book better in most cases.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. All right, we're getting close to wrap up time, but before we go, is there anything, I know you talked about this a little bit earlier about you miss having conversations and hearing book ideas. What are some other things you miss about in-person conferences, and what are some of the things that you're trying to do to kind of make up for those losses?
Yeah, I mean, it is the conversations and the random conversations, someone coming by the booth and picking up a book and saying, oh, this is really interesting. I'm reading something else on this subject by so-and-so, or just little pieces of information that you pick up by happenstance. And that's missing right now. I also miss the enthusiasm for the books. It's so rewarding to sit at the booth and see the books all lined up that you've worked on for the past year and see people react to them and respond to them. And so it's been a little bit difficult. It's kind of felt like an echo chamber in some ways to not get that same feedback. To compensate, I'm trying to do more to reach out to people, scheduling a lot of Zoom meetings. If there are scholars who may be working on something I'm interested in, or may know somebody working on something I'm interested in, I'm trying to just reach out more and create more of those opportunities for conversation. And I would hope that scholars would be doing that too, reaching out to us. I think we're acquisitions editors in general would be happy to engage with you more.
Great. All right. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up the office hour. I do want to reiterate, in case anyone missed it at the very beginning, that all of these books and many, many more books are on sale in our virtual booth. It's upress.ufl.edu/MSA20. And you use the code MSA20 at checkout for great discounts, free shipping, and a free tote bag with every $50 purchase. And this sale runs all the way through December 16th. So you have all of the rest of the fall to take a look at what's in the booth and get some great deals on these books. So thank you to everyone who has been watching. And thank you so much to Stephanie for doing this.
Sure, my pleasure.